G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Welcome back to the Wealth and Wisdom Podcast. My name's Ben Law and I'm your host. Today we've got Trudie Payne with us. Trudie, along with her husband Liam and two kids, Mitch and Bronte, run a successful grazing operation in Central Queensland. Trudie was and still is the personification of a fit, happy, healthy and driven individual. But in 2018, she was diagnosed with one of the most aggressive forms of melanoma you can get. Today, we're going to discuss how she went from her GP saying, "It's nothing to worry about," to a specialist in Brisbane saying, "You've got 6 or 8 weeks before this gets into your bloodstream and then it's game over." This is a story of someone who listened to that little voice inside her and how listening to that voice led to a series of decisions that ultimately saved her life. I personally love the story as there's a number of key lessons around the mindset she had to ignore her GP and trust her gut, and also the financial strategies to protect your family should something like this happen to you. So strap yourselves in and welcome Trudie.
Thanks, Ben. How are you?
Fantastic. Now, Trudie, I want to take you back to when you were first diagnosed with the melanoma. How many years ago was that?
It was actually November 2018.
What's that, 5 years now, isn't it?
Yep.
Now, I remember getting the call from your husband, Liam, and then he sent me through what they call the histopathology results of when they actually took the melanoma out and then cut it up and dissected it and looked at it. And I remember looking at it on the computer screen and going, shit, that's not good. And I can remember feeling a little bit queasy in the stomach because I'd been to enough personal insurance conferences in my time and lodged enough cancer claims to know that the stats around melanoma, especially when it got to a certain stage or Clark level, you know, what the results sort of were going to be. And I have to say that histopathology result scared the hell out of me. So where we'll kick off at is, when did you first think there might actually be a problem?
Well, I noticed there was just like an itchy spot right on my back here, and I kept referring to it, kept scratching. I was talking to my sister and she had just had a skin check and something cut out of her head. And she said, "You better go and get checked out because sometimes when it's itchy and bothers you, it can be a nasty spot." So I actually went into the doctor and they looked at it and said, "No, it's fine." Came back home and then I think it was 10 days later, I was like, "No, I'm going back and going to ask for a biopsy." And at the time, the doctor wasn't there, so there was a locum and they happily did a quick biopsy. And then it was about 3 weeks after that, the doctor rang and said, "Come in." And they said, "Oh, it's a melanoma, but nothing to worry about it, early stage." And it was just before Christmas 2018. And the doctor said, "Come back next year, no trouble." And so I didn't really worry at the time. I thought, oh, well, they've got it all, it's fine. And then my gut feeling was like, oh, I heard the word melanoma, like something's not right. So then I contacted the doctor and got a copy of the pathology results. And then me being me, I had to refer to Dr. Google, and actually I entered it was a stage 1 Clark level 4 nodular melanoma. And it wasn't until it came up that, this is a rare but highly lethal aggressive melanoma. And then I realized, okay, something's not right. And I was talking to my husband Liam's best mate who's had lots of skin cancer over the years. And he said, "You need to go to Brisbane straight away and get a second opinion." And that's when I rang the GP and said, "I need an urgent referral." And it sort of snowballed from there. The next day I was in Brisbane, actually went to a concert down there, and they immediately saw my referral, rang me and said, "I need you in Brisbane urgently." And it was just fortunate I was there. And the doctor wanted to see me 6:30 a.m. in the morning. He had no appointments, but he wanted to fit me in. And it wasn't until he said to me, "This is highly aggressive. If we don't get it out now, you've got to have lots of tests. This type of melanoma can be 6 to 8 weeks before it's in your blood. and it's then terminal. So I was in Brisbane by myself at the time, and I had to ring Liam and tell him, and yeah, it was quite overwhelming. And came home, and the next week we were in Brisbane. Yeah, it ended up having lots of tests, and it was draining to 3 lymph nodes. So it wasn't long before it was going to be in my blood, and they removed 3 lymph nodes, and I ended up having to get, it was 20 centimetres long and 4 centimetres deep, and I think 4 centimetres wide, piece out of my back, to remove, the melanoma, because it wasn't good, but I'm here to tell the story.
Yeah, and I remember seeing the scar when you had it done, because I know I came and saw you when you were in hospital, Trudie, and I remember looking at it and thinking, holy shit, like that's a hell of a cut out of your back. But you've definitely glossed over a few of the details there, because I remember going through the journey at the time that you went to the doctor and it was very clear that the doctor you saw locally was very, very unworried about this, weren't they? And if in your mind, what would have happened if you hadn't have had that or listened to that nagging voice that was inside you and decided to, start to investigate a little bit more rather than just sort of letting it go through to the keeper?
Yes, well, the doctor was very complacent and didn't worry about it. And honestly, if it wasn't my gut feeling and I guess inquisitiveness and talking to Liam's best mate, I wouldn't be here today. And it wasn't until the doctor in Brisbane said how serious it was, it really hit home with Liam and I. And it just, a lesson in life. If something's not right, you don't feel it's right, go and get a second, third, fourth opinion if you need to. Run tests certainly saved my life. And you know your body yourself. Just push the issue. And even since then, I've had to ask for biopsies because I haven't thought a spot's right, and it turns out that they haven't been good spots. So just keep asking questions.
And it's also, I think, the lesson in there is going and seeing specialists for advice or for help to sort of be a little bit balanced and fair. Is when you're seeing someone that doesn't deal with this stuff every day, they can easily miss things, not making an excuse for them, but being able to go and get that second opinion from an absolute specialist is absolutely critical. And like you said, what was it, 2 or 3, it already started draining into your lymph nodes, and within 6 weeks it could have been in your bloodstream, and then it's game over. So if you'd left it, even 2 or 3 weeks and mold any longer, it could have been a completely different result.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you just really got to trust your gut instinct, and I still go every 3 months to Brisbane and get a full body check, which can take up to an hour, have scans, and everyone I know and see, I just plead to them, go and get your 12 monthly skin check. It is a priority. I guess it's no different to getting your car serviced. You have those 12 monthly checks and you're all good.
Now, were you sick or unwell at all at the time, or out of shape, or spending too much time in the sun, or was this something that would have been expected?
I do have fair skin, but I've always been a person to use SPF sunscreen, long sleeve shirts, wide brim hats, always been very sun safe all my life. And I was very fit at that point in time. I was currently marathon training at the time, so I was very fit. I felt, 1,000%. And if it wasn't itchy, I don't know, I wouldn't have noticed anything.
And sometimes in life, some of those really cool convergence of events, like, your gut starts to unnerve you a little bit. You speak to a friend, and that's why we wanted to do this podcast, was to raise the awareness, to be able to go, if you're out there and there's something wrong in your health, it may not have to be melanoma. It could be anything, that you need to trust your gut. And people should tell these stories so that, if someone else has a similar scenario to you where they've gone and got the advice and there's just something niggling them that it's not right, is to get that second opinion.
Oh, for sure. You hear it, so often that they knew they weren't right, and they've been going to their doctor for the last 6 months with no results. So I just tell everyone, get a second opinion if you think that something's not right.
And so, this might be a bit of a rude question, but did you feel like a bit of a crazy person when you came home, in the sense that, you went to the doctor, we trust our doctors, doctor said, don't worry about it, Trudie, and then all of a sudden something's niggling you. Did you feel like you're a bit of a crazy person, or you're off on a tangent and you should just ignore that little voice that's nagging at you inside your head?
Yeah, I did. The doctor actually made me feel like a bit like a hypochondriac, that there wasn't anything wrong. And yeah, so I left it a week, and then it was still itchy, and like even though they'd taken a little piece out, but it obviously didn't get the margins, and it was still all there. And I just so grateful I trusted my gut instinct. And like it actually didn't even look like anything. It was this tiny pinhead red spot. It almost looked like a broken blood capillary. I kept showing Liam, what is that? It's so itchy. And he was like, oh, I can't bloody see anything. There's nothing there, because I have many other freckles. And he was like, it's just a spot. But I'm just so grateful. Yeah, I went and said, can you please just test it? And I still do that now. Just if something's not right, demand.
Do you find that you have to ask even now, Trudie? Like, do you still find like you take control of your own health and I'm not suggesting self-diagnose, but you do your research and then are a little bit more assertive with the medical practitioners and saying, look, let's push this possibly further than we need to just to be doubly sure?
Oh, for sure. Like I myself have to do my own skin checks every 2 weeks. And if there's a spot I notice, I've got to take photos of it, and then in a week's time take more photos, send them to my specialists, and also communicate with my GP. But there has been a few things that when I have gone to the GP, I'm like, I don't like that. And they're like, oh, when are you going to Brisbane next? And I'm like, no, just do a biopsy. But they know me fairly well now because of my history, my melanoma history. They sort of do take notice that, even if it's nothing, test it because you just don't know.
And this isn't a rare occurrence, Trudie. Like when I was a financial advisor and I did these insurance applications for people for a claim for a health event, the most common ones are breast cancer for women, I used to find. Melanoma was the other one, and then heart attacks for men, or prostate cancer as they get older. And you'd be surprised how often this story I've heard. So I only had one recently where someone was not feeling well. Doctor said, don't worry about it. They did tests, couldn't find anything, packed themselves up, took them to Brisbane to see a specialist, and next thing you know, they're having open heart surgery. Another one I had probably 7 or 8 years ago where a lady in her late 40s, she was scheduled for a mammogram. And she said to me, Ben, I was just too busy. I had things going on with the kids. I had work. I had pressures going on. I was booked in. I was just about to cancel the appointment, and my sister rang up and said, hey, I'm coming into town. I know you've got an appointment. I'll come with you. And she went, I don't have time for this, but, why not? Anyhow, they found breast cancer at that stage, and they said it was exactly the same story, another 6 to 8 weeks. And they said you would have been in a very, very dangerous position because it was one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer you could get. And she ended up just having, mastectomies and then chemo, but she managed to get through it. And I think it's almost 10 years later and she's happy and healthy. And so that was just, for me, gives me goosebumps even thinking about that. If she'd have turned around and gone, I'm too busy, I'm not going to go deal with that, what could have actually ended up happening?
Oh, for sure. And it's so important, especially with my history too. Like I've got to make sure even at the dentist, at the optometrist, that they know my melanoma history. You've got to have your regular mammograms, pap smears. It's just an ongoing thing of maintenance, I guess.
And that's a pain in the neck, isn't it? Like it's an annoying thing in life, but it's much worse to be dead, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. And, since my scare, I've been very vigilant with making my appointments and making sure my husband goes to the GP every 6 months, and he would never go, but I actually just ring up, put it on the calendar, and, typical bush bloke says it'll be right. But honestly, without your health, you can't do anything.
No, and it's the people you leave behind as well. So now the second part to this story we wanted to say today is the value of insurance. So as I said, I spent 20 years as a financial advisor, and a big chunk of what we did was protecting the assets that we've got or protecting our family financially. Now, you can do that by having companies and trusts, etc., if you get sued or go bankrupt, etc. But you also, what happens if key people in the business, something happens to them? So they die, they become disabled, or have a major illness. And the 4 types of insurance generally most people most people have, or that they consider, shall we say, is life insurance, which is really easy. When you're dead, you're dead. What we call total and permanent disability, which is you're so disabled you'll never work again. So that could be you've fallen off a horse or off a windmill and become paralysed, you've had a stroke, various reasons. So you're never going to work again. And then the other one is income protection. So if you're sick for a short period of time, it can be an extended period of time, but you're sick and will get better. So that covers the family's income needs. But the other one, which we're talking about here, is something called trauma insurance. Now, we used to put trauma insurance in place for every single client. It was the most expensive, but it was the most claimed, because I think the stats back in the day were 2 out of 3 people will have a trauma event, which is, in simple terms, a heart attack, cancer, stroke by the time they're 65. So it's the most claimed, but it's the most expensive, and it's the one that most people don't have. And so we're going to have a little bit of a chat here about back in the day, I helped you and Liam with the kids put in some key person insurance in place, and we put some cover on Liam, and we also put some cover on you, Trudie, when we did it back in the day. And I can remember, like with most people, sitting down and going through this and saying, okay, well, we need this insurance in place. It's really, really important to protect the family, because if something happens to either of you, this could bring the deck of cards down. And so the event that you had, we ended up getting a claim on your trauma insurance, which I think you said at the time, you're like, I never bloody knew we'd even get it. And so the trauma insurance is for, as I said before, heart attack, cancer, and stroke. It covers a whole lot of other things, but that's the major areas. And the idea is it gives you a lump sum to actually cover the costs of the medical costs. So you've got to fly to Brisbane, you've got to, stay in accommodation. If you get really sick, you might be there for months on end. It's expensive. Both of you may not be able to be back on the farm. Husband might have to go with you, or wife might have to go with you. And then, well, who looks after the farm? We're going to pay someone to do that. And I can remember back when we first put it in place, as for most people, I think it was more Liam was saying, why the bloody hell do we need this stuff? It's a waste of money. We'd be better off spending the money somewhere else. What did you think back when we put that insurance in place? Did you ever think you'd become one of those stats that would get to claim, Trudie?
No, definitely not. Like, I remember when we took it out, and I just thought, we might never use that. What's the point? And it wasn't until we rang you and you said, you can claim on your trauma insurance, and we were like, really? Like, we would never have known that. And just so grateful to have your knowledge with all the insurances.
So I know in your case, you got off very lightly with a very aggressive disease. I think we'd all agree there that to have the operation, you didn't end up having to have chemo or anything like that, and you just have to be very vigilant going back and checking yourself. But what would have been the impact on the family financially? Not your personal, we don't want to discuss your personal financial position, but what would have been the impact on the family from a monetary point of view if it had been 6 months later and all of a sudden you were laid up in Brisbane for 6 to 12 months getting chemotherapy and all those sorts of things? What sort of the impacts would that have been on the family?
Oh, a huge impact financially and emotionally. We're in business with Liam's elderly parents, so there's only so much they can do. And if Liam was in Brisbane, we would have had to hire a manager for the place, possibly a nanny to look after the kids and get them to school. And as you can imagine, that's huge dollars. So it would have been a huge financial impact on us. If I had to be in Brisbane for 6-12 months getting treatment.
Even on and off, if you had to fly down for a week or so or a couple of weeks and then back and forward, there's the discontinuity in the business, but also, flights or driving, accommodation. I mean, accommodation short term's never cheap. Plus then you've got to pay all the specialists.
Yeah, that's right. Well, even now, me going down 3 monthly, I see 2 specialists, plus a night's accommodation, fuel, food. That's a great expense just as is. So I can't even imagine having to be away from home, in accommodation for 6 to 12 months trying to get treatment. Yeah, it would be a huge burden on the family.
And the other thing also, which most people don't talk about, is debt. For most farming families or even just normal business owners, they carry debt, and those obligations are there and have to be paid. And if all of a sudden you're not on the ball doing your budgets, your cash flows, managing your business, etc., that's going to impact things. And banks, they're not going to be overly supportive. They will be for a while, but they're going to want their pound of flesh back. And so being able to cover those debt repayments for a period of time is also more important. So nothing has to be fire sale.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just, very grateful that, we had that insurance in place. And even though, I didn't have to have long-term treatment in Brisbane, it's still ongoing, and I've still got it's always going to be an expense, and I'm always going to have tests and everything. So it has been very helpful.
Yeah. Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode. And the cool thing about the trauma insurance as well is most people will say, Medicare will cover it, but Medicare will cover a little bit of it. But when you break down all the costs, like you said, we've got to employ someone to look after the farm. And if it's long-term, well, you need someone more than just a farm worker. You might need a manager. And how are you going to find them? What's it going to cost you to find a decent one at last, like now? You're going to have to pay a lot more than normal. It's like all the specialist costs. You're going to want the best specialist doing the work. You don't want the one that it takes 6 months to get into under Medicare. You've got all those things that people don't necessarily think about. Now, when we went through the original process, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, isn't it? Because we had to fill out applications, and then we had to go through all these health things. So we had to fill out personal statements about your health history. You have to do medicals and all that sort of stuff. That was painful back in the time. With everyone, it's always a difficult scenario. And I just want to touch on, that was a difficult process, but once we got through it, what that did was it gave us certainty so that when you went to claim on your insurance later on, there was no questions asked. It was like, we've gone through and we've medically underwritten you, we've looked at your scenario and we're happy to insure you. And they just basically, in your scenario, I think it was like 3 weeks before the money was deposited into your account from memory, Trudie. We filled out the application forms, sent the histopathology reports through, they looked at it and they just wrote a check out and sent it through, didn't they? Yeah,
it was very simple once we made the claim, and all we needed was the pathology results and a couple of forms, and it was such an easy process, which at the time, it was quite a stressful time, but that was such an easy process.
Yeah. And you could use that money for whatever you wanted to use it for. It's not like with a car insurance where if you bust the windscreen, they replace the windscreen and then they pay for that windscreen. You get a lump sum of money and then you can spend it on accommodation, travel, and all those sorts of things as well.
Yes, that's right. Yep. Because there's only a certain amount that you get for travel allowance through the health department, and you only get a small portion with Medicare. Yeah, so every little bit helps.
And from your opinion, Trudie, like what I find with a lot of families is they'll look at their scenario and they go, okay, we've got some kids. Because how old were the kids then? Well, they were about 11 and 7, were they?
Yeah, 9 and 6.
9 and 6, okay. So generally most people that look at this, they go, okay, we've got young or youngish children. Usually the driver's debt. We've got a significant amount of debt. And what normally happens is families will go, okay, we'll insure dad. And we'll insure dad because dad's out on the horse every day or in the tractor and he's doing the operational side. before everyone comes screaming and yelling at me, that can be reversed, just being really clear. It's not just dad out in the paddock. But that's usually the mindset that I would use to, my experience, people would say is, well, insure dad because he's the key person in that operational type control. But what people fail to understand is if mum gets sick, becomes totally disabled or dead, that's a massive problem to the business because that drags, let's surely say, the operations manager or dad, or if that person doing that role, drags them back in to look after the family, and they can't actually keep doing their job, can they?
No, that's right. And as it is, I'll help Liam out in the paddock and do all the outside stuff, but I'm also, commuting the kids a fair way to the school bus every day, doing all the company books. So, yeah, like pretty much if something happens to me, yeah, it's not good.
No. And the thing is that if you pass away, it's bad, but it's also worse if you're totally disabled. So that's what people forget is if you get sick for a period of time, it's tough. But and someone passes away emotionally and mentally, it's very difficult. But financially, it's far worse if someone's sick for a long period of time. So if we change the scenario and you'd fallen off a horse and become paralysed, Liam's got to look after you. Like someone's got to look after you. You're in Central Queensland. You're a long way from the nearest support services. Someone's got to look after you on a day-to-day basis, and you can't look after a totally disabled person and run the farm.
Yeah, that's right. You'd need a full-time carer and a carer for the kids and someone to do, the bookwork, pretty much everything.
Yeah, and that all comes at a cost. And there's the opportunity cost and dealing with the kids and boarding school fees. I mean, a lot of people, when we do the calculations and say, well, how much insurance do you actually need? We had to take into account the fact of the boarding school fees. We send your oldest is off at school in Toowoomba, and if something happens to mum or dad and the cash flow in the business slows down for some reason, we want to make sure that we can still keep the kids in school to keep some sort of continuity. Whereas when I know I spoke to a mate of mine a number of years ago and his dad passed away when he was young and they had a property. The kids were off at boarding school. Dad passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. The farm had to be sold due to the debt levels and the kids got pulled out of boarding school. They couldn't go to school anymore. So it was horrendously disruptive there as well.
Yeah, that's right. If you can have that extra in place, it certainly does make it easier on the entire family when something happens.
Yeah. So the two lessons for me is trust your gut. So always listen, ask extra questions and follow things through. And I think that's a great lesson for everything in life. If you're getting advice from your accountant or your lawyer or something like that and you don't feel like it's right, get a second opinion, not just your health. And the second thing is making sure you've got the right insurances or risk protection in place in your family and making sure that it'll actually pay out if something goes wrong. So is there any other piece of advice you give anyone out there, Trudie, if they were going through a similar scenario to you?
Yeah, probably, if you are going through something health-wise, seek mental health as well, because it can be very draining on you as a person and as a family, even to understand what's happening. And it is good to get those support services in place as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep. And also, I think from my point of view is share these messages. If you've had something go wrong like this before, share it with everyone else, because this conversation today, I'm hoping, Trudie, someone, somewhere, somehow will listen and go back and review their insurances in case something goes wrong with their professional advisors. And if they've got a health issue at any time in the future, they're tenacious enough to make sure they don't fall foul of the stats of the people that pass away because they got the wrong advice.
Oh, for sure. Well, I do an annual Facebook post on the anniversary when I was diagnosed, and there's been so many friends, just Facebook friends and their friends that have gone and had skin checks since my experience. And there's several friends that have been diagnosed with melanomas, carcinomas, and BCCs and SCCs, and they have since said, if it wasn't for me raising awareness, that they wouldn't have even gone to the doctor. So, yeah, get a skin check.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Trudie, in my financial advice practice we worked with about 100 families overall. Some of them was financial advice and others were just purely insurance. And in the decade that I ran that business and grew it, we had 3 melanoma claims. So when you look at that stats, let's just assume that's right. That's 3% Well, it's probably a little bit less. It's probably 1.5% if we assume every family's a couple. That's a fairly high stat. And so, yeah, I think it's an important message to share.
Oh, for sure.
Excellent. Two things I want to say before we head off. I've got one last question, which I like to ask all the guests, but I just want to say I'm super happy that you're still around, Trude. I think you're a rock star. I think you do a great job. I'm super grateful that you're willing to come on the podcast and share your story with everyone. But before we go, I have to ask you, what's your definition of true wealth?
True wealth is when you've got a happy, healthy family and love, lots of love in your household. Just because you've got money, it doesn't mean happiness. But if you've got that lovely support network under your roof, and that's all you need in life, really.
No, I can tell. And knowing the family for a long time, I can tell you there's lots of that, lots of fun, lots of laughter and lots of love.
Yeah, I was only thinking yesterday that we've known you for 17 years now, Ben.
Jeez.
And, it's just flown.
Yeah.
But we've had a lot of good times, and, you've helped us so much over the years. Get our insurances and investments in place, and have been a great help.
Yeah. Plus, we've had a lot of laughs.
Yes, we have.
Excellent. All right, Trudie. Well, I thank you very much for being on the podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you down the track.
You're more than welcome, and just everyone get out there and get a skin check.
If you found today's podcast valuable and you want to support Trudie in sharing her message about skin checks, etc., then please share, like on the socials, or forward on to your family and friends. My name's Ben Law, I'm the Financial Bloke, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.